Here we go. Ninth Commandment. We are almost to the close of the commandments, and then we will be moving into the creed. We have 2 commandments left, and then the conclusion of the commandments. And so we have here the 9th commandment. So the 9th and the 10th commandments sound very similar. This one is, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. And the 10th is, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or spouse, his manservant or maidservant, ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And here we see he says house. Right? House, and let's look here at what this means, and I have something I want to talk about here with this. So, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. So coveting is just desiring what you shouldn't desire. It's the wrong desire. Right, so we often think of coveting in terms of possessions and things like that. I want that. Sometimes, often also in terms of people. I want to be like that person. But all I have is what God has given me, or all I have is just this junk. So I want something better. I want something more like this. So what does this mean? As we were talking about coveting, we should fear and love God as we should in every commandment, so that we do not scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or house, or get in a way which only appears right, but help and be of service to him in keeping it. So as we're kind of thinking through this, like I said, we have 2 commandments here. And the way to understand really why there's a distinction between these 2 commandments, or why we separate these 2. I heard another pastor say that the 10th commandment is for things that have legs. So you can see everything here kind of walks around. So a spouse has legs, manservant, ox, donkey. So these are creatures, or other people, other relationships. And this is stuff that does not have legs, like stuff. So the possessions that you have or someone else has. So you see a distinction here, especially when we get to this next week. I'll talk about this again next week. Here, in the 9th commandment, we are not scheming. Right, so we're not plotting little things that we can do in order to get our neighbor's stuff, whether that be in court or whether that be by saying something, well, I thought that was mine, or finders keepers, or however you want to say that. So the scheming to get our neighbor's inheritance or house. Here we'll see that the operative word in the explanation of the 10th commandment is entice. So you're drawing people away who can be manipulated or convinced or coerced, and so enticement is the kind of operative word in the 10th commandment. So we'll talk about that again next week. Today we're going to be focusing on possessions. We got a couple good readings to do as well. So we should not covet your neighbor's, or you shall not covet your neighbor's house. And this is primarily, as we're getting to the conclusion of the 10 commandments, this is this maybe seems a little not concrete. Well, what is this? Because this largely has to do with my feelings or my desires. So what do I make of that? What I feel isn't wrong, right? This is how the world talks about it. What you're feeling is what you're feeling, and that's okay. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. But this says no. That actually your feelings and your desires and your emotions can indeed be sinful. In fact, this is a good thing to think about, as this commandment and the 10th commandment deal with the heart. We'll see here when we get to James. Well, let's just read James real quick. So here we have James. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. So that's where we say that in the Lord's Prayer, that God tempts no one. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. So James gets at this real quick at the beginning of his letter, or his address. Our desires are twisted. And so this starts in the heart. Jesus says this as well in the Gospels when he's talking to the Pharisees, and he says it's not what goes into the mouth that makes one unclean, but what comes out of it, because what comes out of it is all kinds of enviousness, slander, lust, covetousness, etc., etc. So it's what comes out of the heart that is a problem. And the heart, especially as we consider ourselves individually, is where we start with. All my thoughts kind of occur originally in my heart, things like that. So you can see covetousness then in each commandment as you go back through. So here we are in the 9th, and it's covet. But the coveting of the 8th commandment, which is bearing false witness against your neighbor, is bitterness. And the 7th commandment, theft, the coveting is manifested in greed. 6th commandment, adultery, is manifested in lust. 5th commandment, murder, is manifested in anger against your neighbor. 4th commandment, authority, we see rebellion. I don't want that, or I want your power. I want the authority that has been given to you, or I want to destroy your authority, which kind of comes back to anger and greed and bitterness. And so then we break the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st commandments by false religion, which is making ourselves God, or taking in any way removing God from his throne. So it's a abuse of religion, or a absence of religion, or an indifference to religion, or a crookedness of religion, all these things. And we see the coveting of God's power, or God's position and place and name and word. So you can kind of see this as it goes all the way through, all the way back up. So you end up, this is why we always talk about this, when you break any one commandment, you end up breaking like 4 of them, 5 of them, and always the first. And so you cannot keep the law barely at all. It's really amazing. So this one then starts in the heart. And so we focus here on where sin begins, which is with you, because this is your fault. You are the sinner. That's what the law tells us. So we got a couple things we'll talk about here. Like I said, James, this is the other thing I want to talk about with James. So as this is starting, it begins in our desires. Then desire, when it has conceived, so he's using like birth and labor language, it gives birth to sin. And so we sin by desiring what we should not be desiring. And when sin is fully grown, it brings forth, or births, death, and so we die. This is serious. So Hebrews 13 says, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So the kind of the vice of the 9th and 10th commandment is desire, or false desire especially. And the virtue that we see in this is contentment. God has given us all these gifts. He has given us the gift of our own name in the 8th commandment, our own things in the 7th commandment, our spouse and family in the 6th commandment, our own life in the 5th commandment, the gift of authority in parents, in the office of parent in the 4th commandment, the gift of his word and his name and himself in the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st commandments. And we then are to be content with these gifts, to be grateful that God has given such gifts to us, and not to look across over there at our neighbor's stuff and say, I want that, because he's got something I want and it shines. Whatever that happens to be. This is no good. So here's from Proverbs 21. The desire of the sluggard kills him, for his hands refuse to labor. All day long he craves and craves, but the righteous gives and does not hold back. That's a beautiful proverb. The desire of the sluggard kills him, right? Coveting is like a hunger until you waste away, because no matter how much you consume, you can never get enough. You're always going to look towards something else. And this is important, especially now. You think about us in the 21st century. We are a culture that delights in and encourages coveting to no end. Consider all the things in our world. Right? We have a very skewed idea of sex. And so we are to desire other people, want things like that, or treat sex like it's a human right or something like that. And so we want all kinds of stuff that we should not want in this way. I want freedom to use my body however you wish. So that's going against the 4th commandment, 5th commandment, 6th commandment, to covet in this way. We also have, let's see what we have. What do we have? Sex / intimacy, which is, and the idea here is that this is divorced from marriage, which means it's something we ought not desire. So that's coveting. We also, marketing. How many commercials do you see a day? We don't, TV I think is starting to slip away, but it's being replaced with YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all these things. And ad after ad after ad shows up, and these are designed to make you want things. You're to want this. And what you have isn't that good. It's not big enough, it's not small enough, it's not fast enough, it's not new enough, it's not efficient enough. So you got to throw out what you have and want something new. It's kind of all over the place. And, with work too, nobody is content with their work, whatever that work might be, especially, so maybe this is something to think about too. Moms and dads, maybe especially moms in this culture, in our culture now, where it's treated as to be a mom is a stumbling block to your career. And that should be your primary thing. Career first, mom second. So there's this coveting also so this goes back to Genesis, mothers desiring the authority or the position of the father, or the wife desiring the position or authority of the husband, which is a part of the curse of Eve. And so this doesn't mean that only women destroy marriages. Quite the contrary. Dads do as well, or fathers do as well, which is funny because this kind of comes back here too. We destroy these things together. But part of the curse of Eve is a desire it sets spouses against each other. And this is no good. And when you are at work, you want a different job, right? So we hear, the way this sounds a lot now is, do what you love. Follow your passion. Things like that. And that's maybe true to some extent, but this actually is very destructive, because to neglect that is to despise what God has given you, whether it's work or a stable job or whatever. And God has given you something and by which you can serve your neighbor, namely your family, but then also your church and your community and people around you in ways like this. And to neglect this or reject it is no good. Another way that we covet as well, especially this one's common in the church, is I need to do something radical. I need to be a radical Christian, which means I got to go to the Sudan or to Mexico or to, I don't know, wherever I am not, and I need to do wonderful things for the church. And so what I'm doing right now, gathering for worship with the saints around the altar, singing hymns and songs of praise, receiving the sacraments, coming to potlucks, gathering for Oktoberfest or whatever it is that we're doing, going to Sunday school, then going home and working faithfully, loving my spouse, taking care of my kids, or listening to my parents. All of these things are then are pitted against being an authentic, there's another word that we hear a lot, an authentic, genuine Christian. No, this is wrong. This is not a right understanding of this. Life is mundane, and that's actually a gift. So we kind of see all these ways that we covet. So here we have Jesus in Luke, and he's talking to someone in the crowd. Someone in the crowd said to him, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. So he wants his stuff. Now you think back then, the inheritance was given to the firstborn. And this means that he is younger. So he wants his brother, who is older, to divide the inheritance with me. So he goes to Jesus and says, hey, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. And Jesus says to him, man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you? And he said to him, take care and be on your guard against all covetousness. For one's life does not consist of the abundance of his possessions. That is a thing to consider, what he says here. All right, so this man's immediate coveting is for something that is not given to him, which is the inheritance of his father. That is passed down to this other son. So Jesus says, life does not consist in the abundance of a person's possessions. You are not what you own. And trying to clarify your identity or make yourself more important or prop yourself up or put forth a certain kind of self or a certain image of yourself is a striving after the wind, as Solomon would say in Ecclesiastes. You're not your possessions. Your possessions are gifts and tools for you in order to serve your neighbor and take care of all of your bodily needs. But it's not... you don't want to be piling up more and more and more. And so he told him a parable. The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, I like how he says this, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. So this is interesting because you remember, like all the cultures kind of leading up to this have a focus on possessions. So the Egyptians, remember, when a pharaoh dies, they built a pyramid or a tomb of some kind, and they would put the pharaoh's sarcophagus in there, and they didn't want his body to rot, so they embalmed it and entombed it in a certain way. They mummified him. And then not only did they do that, but they also filled this with all of his stuff, which included his servants. I would not want to be a servant of Pharaoh, because then the servants just got to go in the pyramid and just die in there. But so they had this idea that they were going to take all these things to the afterlife with them. But God is saying, no, this is not how this will be. This night your soul is required of you, foolish man. Whose stuff will all of your stuff be? What is all this stuff that you have for? And that's a good question to ask of our possessions. Oh, let's see here. I got some stuff from Luther related to all this. So he's talking about this here. In whatever way such things happen, we must know that God does not want you to deprive your neighbor of anything that belongs to him, so that he suffer the loss and you gratify your greed with it. So this is an interesting thing, kind of paired with what Jesus is talking about with this man. The man who says to his soul, soul, you have a bunch of good stuff. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. The stuff that has been given to you is for your neighbor, actually, which is really interesting thing that God has done, how he has set up creation in this way. So these things are not necessarily your own, or they're not just for you. Everything that you have, everything that you are, is given in service and love for your neighbor. So God does not want you to deprive your neighbor of anything that belongs to him, so that he suffer the loss and you gratify your greed with it. This is true even if you would keep it honorably before the world, for it is a secret and sly trick done under the hat, as we say, so it may not be noticed. Although you go your way as if you had done no wrong, you have still injured your neighbor. It If it is not called stealing and cheating, it is still called coveting your neighbor's property. That is, aiming at possession of it, luring it away from him without his consent, and being unwilling to see him enjoy what God has granted him. Even though the judge and everyone must let you keep it, God will not let you keep it. He sees the deceitful heart and the world's malice, which is sure to take an extra long measure wherever you yield to her a finger's breadth. Eventually, public wrong and violence follow. So here he's saying this stuff, the breaking of other commandments follows covetousness. So we're going to see this also in the next text that we read, the appointed text for this week for Sunday school from, nope, not Ephesians. Where'd it go? First Kings. I was going to say Second Kings, but I thought it was First Kings. So here he's talking about court. So one of the things that is possible to happen is you want somebody else's things, and you can charge legally that it's yours sometimes, depending on how you work the system. So God's saying that this is not an acceptable practice. And that was true also in the 1500s. It was true in the first century. It's always been true. You can make something look right depending on how you frame it and talk about it, and so get your will. And even the judge will have to side with you, but all you've really done is coveted your neighbor's stuff, and that's unacceptable. So Ephesians 5, he talks here about how we should walk as children of the light. Be imitators of God as beloved children. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity and covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. It's interesting that he ties this in, all sexual immorality and impurity and covetousness. Right? So this is stuff you do with your body and stuff you do that defiles you, and then this is coming from inside of you. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. So that's another fascinating thing he says here. To covet other people's things is idolatry, which is a breaking of the first, second, and third commandment. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Now he's talking here, let no one deceive you with empty words. And that, false teaching, but also sales and stuff in the market. So this, you can think about this. Don't let commercials entice you with empty words or deceive you with empty words. God has given you all that you need. Therefore, do not become partakers with them. For at one time you were darkness, and that's what a covetous heart is. It's dark. But now you are the light of the world. Walk as children of the light. Try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. And this is probably from a baptismal hymn in the first century, which is pretty neat. So let us consider our text then. This is a great story, as we are reading this, of Ahab and Jezebel, who's a monster, and Naboth. So Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Now, if you know anything about 1 Kings or you know anything about Ahab, you know that he is a bad king. He is not remembered well, although he does repent at part of this, and after this event happens, when Elijah calls him out for sinning, and calamity does not come on his household, but eventually it comes on his children. So after this, Ahab said to Naboth, give me your vineyard. So he looks over and he sees his vineyard. Look at all those grapes. And it's very pleasing. I want your vineyard. Here's the castle. That's not a very good castle, but it's a castle. Spires. So he sees it. There's Ahab, and he wants Naboth's vineyard. Naboth's over here just hanging out in his vineyard. Give me your vineyard that I may have it for a vegetable garden because it's near my house. It's convenient. And I'll give you a better vineyard for it. Or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money. I'll pay you. I'm going to pay you well for this. But Naboth said to Ahab, Yahweh forbid that I should give to you the inheritance of my fathers. This is no mere vineyard. This is land that has been passed down from generation to generation, and it would be insulting and ridiculous to give it away so flippantly. Ahab went into his house vexed. Oh, I don't like that. And sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite has said to him. For he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my father. And so Ahab, like a child, lies down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. What a baby. And here we're going to hear about Jezebel. Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said, Why is your spirit so vexed that you eat no food? He said to her, Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it please you, I will give you another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give you my vineyard. And Jezebel, his wife, said to him, Do you now govern Israel? Arise and eat bread and let your heart be cheerful. She's saying, act like a king. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So now we're going to see Jezebel and how she operates, which is straight up wicked. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with the city, and she sent the letters to the elders and leaders who lived with Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, Proclaim a fast, set Naboth at the head of the people, and set two worthless men opposite him. So she's saying here, set two liars and crooks. And let them bring a charge against him, saying, You have cursed God and the king. Now you know already, this is the 8th commandment. Bringing false testimony. This is not true. Oops. This is not true. But the punishment for this is this, stoning. Then take him out and stone him to death. So this is what her letter wrote, or what she wrote in her letter in Ahab's name to the elders and leaders of the city. So the men of the city, the elders and leaders who lived there, did as Jezebel sent word to them. As it is written in the letters that she had sent to them, they proclaimed a fast, set Naboth at the head of the people. And two worthless men came in and sat opposite him. And the worthless men brought a charge against Naboth in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth cursed God and the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned. He is dead. As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, Arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive, he's dead. And as soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab arose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. So he stole his vineyard. So this is a good example of what we saw in James about coveting or desire leading to sin and sin leading to death. So death not only for Ahab, but we also see the death of Naboth because of Ahab's coveting. So sin just causes all kinds of problems in our lives. Now, I want you to be reassured. Jezebel does not get away with all this stuff. Jehu Jehu the king who comes after has his servants, or has Jezebel's servants throw her out a window, and then her body gets eaten by dogs, as the prophet prophesied right after this event. So Jezebel is horrible, but God is just, and he takes care of her in a way that is humiliating and fitting for her wickedness. So you shall not covet your neighbor's house. There's some thoughts for you this week. Hope you have a good day. We'll see you in worship.